In the heart of Los Angeles, where glitz and glamour often overshadow the struggles of the voiceless, Keanu Reeves was about to embark on a mission that would redefine his purpose and change countless lives. It was a quiet Sunday morning, and Keanu Reeves sat in his modest backyard, sipping his black coffee while flipping through the news on his tablet. Unlike the typical image of a Hollywood superstar, Keanu preferred the quiet life. He relished moments of solitude, far from the chaos of the film industry. Scrolling past headlines about box office hits and celebrity gossip, his attention was caught by a disturbing article. Puppy Mill raid uncovers horrific conditions, hundreds of dogs in desperate need. His brow furrowed as he read further, learning about the inhumane conditions in which these animals were kept: cramped cages, little to no food, and absolutely no love. Keanu had always been an animal lover. Growing up, he had fond memories of his childhood dog, Max, who had been his companion through thick and thin. The thought of these helpless creatures suffering struck a chord deep within him. He set his tablet down and leaned back, lost in thought. Later that day, as Keanu drove through the streets of Los Angeles, he found himself unable to shake the images from the article. His car slowed as he passed by an animal shelter. A large banner hung outside: "Volunteers needed, help us rehabilitate Puppy Mill survivors." Without hesitation, Keanu pulled into the parking lot. The shelter wasn't what he expected. The modest building was bustling with activity, volunteers carrying supplies, barking dogs echoing from within, and the air thick with a mix of urgency and compassion. As he stepped inside, heads turned. It wasn't every day that a global superstar walked into a local shelter. But Keanu, ever humble, waved off the murmurs and introduced himself to the staff. "I'm here to help," he said simply. Meeting the rescue team. Keanu was introduced to the shelter's director, Maria Hernandez, a fiery woman in her late 40s who had dedicated her life to animal welfare. She gave him a quick tour, explaining the scale of the operation. "These dogs have been through hell," Maria said, her voice tinged with anger. "We've managed to rescue over 300 from that puppy mill, but this is just the beginning. They need medical attention, socialization, and, eventually, loving homes." Keanu listened intently, his jaw tightening as she described the conditions the dogs had endured. "What can I do?" he asked, his voice steady but determined. Maria raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to get involved? This isn't a publicity stunt, it's hard work." Keanu smiled. "I'm not here for publicity. I'm here for them." As Maria guided him to the kennels, Keanu's heart broke at the sight of the dogs. Many were trembling, their eyes filled with fear. Others barked nervously, their bodies frail from malnutrition. But one dog caught his attention. A scruffy, medium-sized mutt with shaggy black fur and a pair of strikingly intelligent eyes stared at him from the corner of the kennel. Unlike the others, this dog didn't cower or bark. He simply watched, his gaze unflinching. "What's his story?" Keanu asked, pointing to the dog. Maria glanced at the mutt. "That's Shadow. He was one of the hardest to rescue. Found locked in a filthy cage, chained, and terrified. But there's something about him, he's a fighter." Keanu knelt down, extending his hand through the bars. Shadow sniffed cautiously before stepping closer, his tail wagging faintly. In that moment, a connection was formed. By the end of the day, Keanu had not only decided to volunteer regularly at the shelter but had also committed to using his platform to raise awareness about the plight of abused and abandoned animals. He began brainstorming ideas with Maria, planning fundraisers, social media campaigns, and public service announcements. As Keanu left the shelter that evening, Shadow's watchful eyes followed him, a silent promise forming between them. Neither of them knew it yet, but their bond would soon be tested in ways that would change both their lives forever. The sun was just beginning to rise over Los Angeles when Keanu Reeves arrived at the shelter for his first full day as a volunteer. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of morning dew and the soft chirping of birds. But inside the shelter, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Barking echoed through the halls, a cacophony of voices from dogs still adjusting to their new surroundings. Volunteers moved with purpose, carrying food, water, and supplies from room to room. Keanu stepped inside, greeted by Maria's no-nonsense energy. Her dark hair was pulled into a practical bun, and she wore a shirt that read, "Rescue is Love." She handed him a clipboard before he could even say good morning. "Glad you're here early," she said, her voice brisk but warm. "We've got a lot to do today. The medical team is coming to evaluate more of the dogs, and we need all hands on deck." Keanu nodded, scanning the list of tasks she had given him. He was assigned to assist with feeding and cleaning first, followed by helping the team socialize the more traumatized dogs. It was humbling work, but he approached it with the same dedication he brought to his craft. As he walked to the supply room, he caught a glimpse of Shadow in his kennel. The scruffy black dog was lying down, his head resting on his paws, but his sharp eyes followed Keanu's every move. There was an intelligence in those eyes, a quiet intensity that made Keanu pause. "You and me, buddy," he murmured softly before continuing on. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Keanu worked alongside the other volunteers, scrubbing kennels, refilling water bowls, and carefully measuring out food. His hands grew calloused, and his muscles ached, but he didn't complain. Each task brought him closer to understanding the magnitude of what these animals had endured, and what it would take to help them heal. Around noon, Maria approached him with a serious expression. "We need your help with something," she said. "There's a group of dogs in the isolation area that haven't responded well to human interaction. They're too scared to eat, and they need gentle handling to come around. Think you're up for it?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. Show me the way." Maria led him to a quieter section of the shelter, where the barking was muffled and the air felt heavier. The isolation area housed the most traumatized dogs, those who had suffered the worst abuse. As they walked past the kennels, Keanu saw the extent of the damage. Some dogs cowered in the corners, their bodies trembling with fear. Others growled low in their throats, their eyes wild with mistrust. "This is where it gets tough," Maria said. "These dogs need patience. You can't rush them, can't force anything. Just sit with them, let them get used to your presence. Sometimes that's all it takes." Keanu nodded, his jaw tightening. He stepped into the first kennel, where a small terrier mix was curled up in the corner. The dog's ribs were visible beneath its thin coat, and it flinched at the sound of the door closing. Keanu moved slowly, lowering himself to the floor and sitting cross-legged. He didn't speak or reach out, letting the dog observe him from a safe distance. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Keanu stayed still, his breathing steady, his posture relaxed. Gradually, the terrier began to uncurl, its dark eyes darting toward him with cautious curiosity. Keanu smiled softly but didn't move, allowing the dog to make the first approach. Finally, the terrier took a tentative step forward, then another, until it was close enough to sniff his hand. "You're safe now," Keanu murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. The dog's nose brushed his fingers, and for the first time in what must have been weeks, its tail gave a hesitant wag. By the end of the day, Keanu had worked with 3 dogs in the isolation area, each one making small but significant progress. Maria watched from the doorway, her arms crossed and a rare smile on her face. "You've got a knack for this," she said as he emerged from the last kennel, his shirt covered in dog hair and his eyes tired but content. "I just treat them like I'd want to be treated," Keanu replied. With kindness. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Keanu's presence at the shelter didn't go unnoticed, and soon the media caught wind of his involvement. Paparazzi camped outside the building, snapping photos of him carrying bags of dog food or kneeling beside the kennels. At first, the attention made the shelter staff nervous, but Keanu used the spotlight to their advantage. He began posting updates on his social media accounts, sharing photos and stories of the rescued dogs. Each post went viral, drawing attention to the shelter's work and inspiring thousands of his followers to donate or volunteer at their local shelters. Maria was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, but Keanu remained grounded. "This isn't about me," he said during an impromptu press conference outside the shelter. "It's about them. These dogs deserve a chance at a better life, and we all have the power to make that happen." As the donations poured in, the shelter was able to expand its resources, hiring more staff and upgrading their facilities. They even organized an adoption event, where dozens of the rescued dogs found loving homes. Keanu attended the event, mingling with adopters and personally thanking them for opening their hearts to these animals. But even as the shelter celebrated its successes, Keanu couldn't ignore the bond he had formed with Shadow. The scruffy black dog had grown increasingly attached to him, wagging his tail enthusiastically whenever Keanu approached. One evening, as he sat outside Shadow's kennel, Maria joined him, a knowing look on her face. "You're thinking about adopting him, aren't you?" she asked. Keanu chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "It's crossed my mind." "Well, he seems to have chosen you," Maria said with a smile. "Dogs are good judges of character." Keanu looked at Shadow, who was now lying contentedly at his feet. "Maybe it's time I gave him a real home." The decision felt right, and a few days later, Keanu officially adopted Shadow. The paperwork was quick, but the moment felt monumental. As he walked out of the shelter with Shadow trotting beside him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. However, their journey was far from over. Shadow's story, and the story of the shelter, was just beginning. The gentle hum of tires against asphalt was the only sound in the early evening as Keanu Reeves drove Shadow home for the first time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city, and Shadow sat quietly in the passenger seat, his scruffy black fur glowing in the golden light. Keanu glanced over at him occasionally, a soft smile playing on his lips. Shadow had been through so much, yet here he was, calm, trusting, and full of potential. As they pulled into Keanu's driveway, Shadow's ears perked up. The modest home, surrounded by trees and far from the chaos of Hollywood, was a sanctuary. Keanu opened the passenger door, and Shadow leapt out gracefully, sniffing the air with curiosity. "Well, buddy," Keanu said, kneeling to scratch behind Shadow's ears. "This is home now. Let's make it a good one." Inside, Keanu led Shadow through the house, showing him each room as if he were giving a tour to an old friend. Shadow followed closely, his tail wagging tentatively. When they reached the living room, Shadow seemed to decide it was his favorite spot, circling a plush rug before lying down with a satisfied sigh. Keanu chuckled. "Good choice. That's where I watch movies. Looks like we'll be spending a lot of time there." The next few days were a blend of adjustment and bonding. Shadow was quick to adapt to his new environment, but certain triggers, loud noises, sudden movements, made him flinch. Keanu noticed these moments and worked patiently to reassure him. He spoke softly, moved gently, and gave Shadow the space he needed to feel safe. Their routine began to form. Morning walks through the wooded trails near the house became a favorite activity for both. Keanu found peace in the quiet of nature, while Shadow seemed to come alive, his energy and confidence growing with each outing. They would return home, both panting and content, and settle into the living room, where Keanu often found himself reflecting on the journey so far. One evening, as they lounged by the fireplace, Keanu's phone buzzed. It was Maria. "Keanu, we need you," she said, her voice urgent. "We've got a lead on another puppy mill, and this one's bad. The authorities are raiding it tomorrow, but we'll need all the help we can get to transport the dogs and provide immediate care." Keanu didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." The following morning was a whirlwind of activity. Keanu arrived at the shelter early, Shadow trotting confidently by his side. The air buzzed with anticipation as volunteers loaded vans with supplies, crates, blankets, food, and medical kits. Maria briefed the team, her expression grave. "This mill is bigger than the last one," she said. "Reports say there could be over 500 dogs. Many of them are in critical condition. We'll need to act fast once we're on site." Keanu nodded, his jaw set. He looked down at Shadow, who seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. "You ready for this, buddy?" Shadow wagged his tail, his eyes bright with determination. The convoy of vans set out, winding through rural backroads to reach the mill. As they approached, the scene unfolded before them, a decrepit property surrounded by chain-link fences, with the sound of barking and whining carrying through the air. Police cars were already on site, their lights flashing as officers moved to secure the area. Keanu stepped out of the van, his heart sinking at the sight. Rows of makeshift cages lined the property, each one filled with dogs of all sizes and breeds. Many were emaciated, their fur matted and their eyes dull with exhaustion. The stench of neglect was overwhelming. The volunteers sprang into action, carefully approaching the cages to assess the dogs' conditions. Keanu joined them, his movements deliberate and calm. He crouched by a cage housing a trembling golden retriever, her ribs visible beneath her dirty coat. "Hey, girl," he murmured, his voice soothing. We're here to get you out." The dog's tail gave a weak wag, and Keanu felt a lump rise in his throat. He opened the cage and gently lifted her into his arms, carrying her to the medical station. As the hours passed, the team worked tirelessly to rescue the dogs. Keanu moved from one cage to the next, his heart breaking with each new discovery. Some dogs were too weak to stand, their bodies ravaged by neglect. Others cowered in fear, their spirits shattered by years of abuse. Yet, amidst the heartbreak, there were moments of hope, tails wagging, hesitant licks, and eyes that began to brighten as the dogs realized they were finally safe. Shadow, too, played a role. Though Keanu initially planned to keep him away from the chaos, Shadow's calm presence proved invaluable. He seemed to instinctively understand which dogs needed reassurance, approaching them with a gentle sniff or a wag of his tail. His confidence gave the other dogs courage, and Keanu couldn't have been prouder. As night fell, the rescue mission drew to a close. The team had saved over 400 dogs, each one loaded into vans bound for the shelter. Keanu stood by one of the vans, Shadow at his side, watching as the last crate was secured. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but so did a sense of fulfillment. "We did good today," Maria said, joining him. Her voice was weary but tinged with pride. "But the work doesn't stop here." Keanu nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "No, it doesn't." The journey back to the shelter was quiet, the vans filled with the soft sounds of breathing and the occasional whimper. Keanu sat in the passenger seat, Shadow resting his head on Keanu's lap. He stroked the dog's fur absently, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. At the shelter, the real work began. The medical team sprang into action, triaging the dogs and addressing their immediate needs. Keanu stayed late into the night, assisting wherever he could. He cleaned kennels, prepared food, and sat with the dogs who were too scared to be alone. Shadow remained by his side, a steady presence amidst the chaos. By the time Keanu finally returned home, the sun was beginning to rise. He collapsed onto the couch, Shadow curling up beside him. As exhaustion claimed him, Keanu felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just about rescuing dogs, it was about giving them a second chance at life. And in doing so, he had found a new direction for his own life as well. The days following the massive rescue were a blur of activity. The shelter, once a modest operation, was now at maximum capacity, bursting with the energy of over 400 rescued dogs. Volunteers worked around the clock to provide care, and the air was filled with a mixture of barking, laughter, and the occasional tear. Keanu Reeves had barely left the shelter since the raid. Shadow was by his side, his calm presence a source of comfort for both the humans and animals around him. Keanu had always thought of himself as someone who gave his all to his craft, but this was different. This wasn't about fame or accolades, it was about saving lives. One morning, as Keanu carried a tray of food bowls to one of the overcrowded kennels, Maria approached him with a clipboard in hand. Her expression was a mix of pride and exhaustion. "You've been amazing, Keanu," she said. "But we need to think bigger. The shelter can't sustain this many dogs for long. We need to get them adopted, and we need help." Keanu set down the tray and wiped his hands on his jeans. "What do you have in mind?" Maria handed him the clipboard. It was filled with ideas, fundraisers, adoption drives, social media campaigns, but one proposal stood out. "A documentary?" Keanu asked, raising an eyebrow. Maria nodded. "We need the world to see what's happening. You have the platform, the resources. If we can create something powerful, it could change everything, not just for these dogs, but for animal welfare everywhere." The idea resonated deeply with Keanu. Over the next few weeks, he threw himself into the project, calling on friends and colleagues from the film industry to help. Directors, producers, and camera crews volunteered their time, inspired by Keanu's passion. Together, they began documenting the stories of the rescued dogs, their journey from the horrors of the puppy mill to the safety of the shelter. The process was emotionally taxing. Each dog had a story, and many of them were heartbreaking. There was Bella, a tiny chihuahua who had spent her entire life in a cage, used solely for breeding. Her legs were weak from lack of movement, and her eyes carried a deep sadness. There was Max, a large German shepherd who had been beaten so severely that he flinched at every sudden movement. And then there was Daisy, a playful Labrador mix who, despite her scars, wagged her tail at every human she met. Keanu spent hours with the dogs, building trust and capturing their transformations on camera. Shadow often appeared in the footage, his role as a therapy dog shining through as he interacted with the more timid rescues. The bond between Shadow and the other dogs was undeniable, and it quickly became a central theme of the documentary. As the weeks turned into months, the documentary began to take shape. Titled Second Chances, The Journey of Rescue Dogs, it was a raw, unfiltered look at the realities of animal abuse and the resilience of those who survived it. The film wasn't just about the dogs, it was about the humans who fought for them, the volunteers who gave their time and love, and the adopters who opened their homes and hearts. The premiere was held in Los Angeles, at a theater packed with animal lovers, celebrities, and media. Keanu, dressed simply in a black suit, stood on stage with Maria and a few of the shelter's most remarkable success stories, including Bella, Max, and Daisy, now happy and healthy in their new homes. As the lights dimmed and the documentary began, the audience was silent, captivated by the powerful imagery and heartfelt stories. By the time the credits rolled, there wasn't a dry eye in the theater. Keanu stood at the podium, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about them. Every single one of these dogs deserves a second chance, and I hope this film inspires all of you to make a difference." The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, and shelters across the country reported an increase in adoptions. The documentary went viral, sparking conversations about animal welfare and the need for stricter regulations on puppy mills. Keanu's platform had become a beacon of hope, shining a light on an issue that had long been ignored. But amidst the success, Keanu faced a personal challenge. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Shadow, he noticed the dog limping slightly. Concerned, he took Shadow to the vet the next day. The diagnosis was unexpected. An old injury, likely from his time at the puppy mill, had caused long-term damage to Shadow's leg. While not life-threatening, it would require surgery and a lengthy recovery. Keanu was heartbroken. Shadow had been his rock, his partner through this journey, and now it was his turn to provide support. He scheduled the surgery immediately, clearing his calendar to ensure he could be there for Shadow every step of the way. The recovery process was slow but transformative. Keanu turned his home into a haven for Shadow, setting up a cozy bed in the living room and spending hours by his side. They took short, careful walks, gradually building Shadow's strength. And through it all, their bond deepened. Shadow's journey became an inspiration for others. Keanu shared updates on social media, using Shadow's story to highlight the resilience of rescue animals. Each post was met with an outpouring of love and support, furthering the message of the documentary. One particularly emotional moment came when Shadow, after weeks of recovery, took his first unassisted step. Keanu captured the moment on video, his voice filled with pride as he encouraged Shadow. The clip went viral, symbolizing hope and perseverance. By the end of the year, the impact of the rescue mission and the documentary was undeniable. Hundreds of dogs had found homes, and the shelter had expanded its operations, partnering with other organizations to continue the fight against animal cruelty. Keanu, once known solely as an actor, had become a powerful advocate for animal welfare, using his fame to create lasting change. As Keanu sat in his backyard one evening, watching Shadow chase a ball with newfound energy, he felt a profound sense of purpose. This journey had started as a chance encounter, but it had become a calling. And as Shadow returned to his side, tail wagging and eyes shining, Keanu knew that together, they had made a difference.